Hello, members. Good evening. Welcome, everybody. I hope that you're excited, as excited, I should say, as I am to welcome Edouard and Tim this evening for an incredibly special Fine Wine Beaujolais event. I will allow Tim Sykes, our buyer for Beaujolais, to do a formal introduction in a moment, and I will just do a brief intro about some housekeeping and general understanding about how these events work, as I'm sure many of you already know, but I do know we've got some new attendees this evening as well. So some of you will be joining with wine kits or sample packs. I hope that you've managed to open the packs and took my advice on using scissors. Not everybody has before, but I hope that no wine was spilt in the process. For those of you without packs, please don't worry. You're going to have a lovely evening tonight as well. Edouard and Tim have got plenty of information to share with you. And 3 of the wines of the 4 they're going to talk about are for sale by the bottle. So I will share those details at the end of the tasting. Please do, as I can see someone already has, and I encourage you to do so, use the chat to let us know where you are and what you're drinking. If it's, hopefully it's a Château du Moulin-à-Vent this evening. Somebody, David and Penny, have said they're already enjoying a bottle of the 2018, which is fantastic. When you are using the chat, make sure you select everyone, not just hosts and panelists. Otherwise, only the 3 of us will be able to see. Also, and most importantly, there is a Q&A function. So please use the Q&A to pop some questions in for both Edouard and Tim tonight. At the last sort of 15 minutes of the session, I will be asking those questions of them. It's just a bit easier for everyone if they go into the chat and then we don't into the Q&A and then we don't clog up the chat. So that is enough chat from me. I'm going to hand over to Tim Sykes, our buyer for Beaujolais, and Tim's going to introduce Edouard. So good evening, Tim, and cheers.
Anna, good evening. Thank you very much for the welcome. It's a great pleasure. Well, first of all, welcome members and guests. Delighted that you could join us this evening. I'm very pleased to introduce Edouard Parinet, who actually lives in Paris and is in Paris tonight, but also divides his time between Paris and Beaujolais. And Edouard's family purchased this property, Château du Moulin-à-Vent, which is one of the most historic properties in the whole of Beaujolais, back in 2009. Edouard, is that correct? 2009? You're muted. There we go.
This is correct, Tim, 2009.
So your family is not from a wine background originally, is it?
So no, actually the estate Château du Moulin-à-Vent has at least 300 centuries of existence, but my family and myself, we were not from the wine world originally, and so it's been now 14 years that we have, I would say, embraced this life.
Yes, well, you certainly bought one of the most highly regarded properties with fantastic terroir, and we'll get on to the terroir and what makes the wine so special. But I think it's probably worth doing a little introduction, Edouard, about the history of the property and also the history of Moulin-a-Vent itself, because Moulin-a-Vent is, in my book, one of the most special of the 10 crus of Beaujolais, and its wines tend to be the longest lived and command some of the highest prices. So perhaps maybe start with how wine began in Moulin-a-Vent many, many years ago.
Yeah, I think actually, Tim, his story is the very nice first point to talk about when it comes to Beaujolais and Cru Beaujolais. Before that, I just want to say thank you to you, the Wine Society, Anna and Tim, for bringing me on stage tonight, and thank you to all of you to be with us tonight. I'm very glad. When it comes to history, actually, what I must mention is that the very first vineyard in Beaujolais, just like in Burgundy or in the Rhône, they were planted in the 2nd century after Christ, along this road that Romans were used to build to grow their expansion. And along this road, actually ours was called La Via Agrippa. They were planting a lot of various cultures, and vines was one of them. So that's how all the regions along the Rhône and then the Saône got planted with vines. You can see the map, actually. Thank you for showing it, with the various main roads built by the Romans in the current France. So that's the very starting point. Actually, also I can tell you that our village, the name of our AOC is Moulin-a-Vent, because we have this windmill right in the heart of our AOC, but our village is called Romanèche. And Romanèche used to be Romanesca, the Roman name of Romanèche. So you can imagine that 2,000 years ago, it was a small city for Romans on this Via Agrippa. After that, so I don't have a lot of history as old as this, but what I can say is that the wines of Les Torrents, prior to talking about the Moulin-a-Vent, we were talking about the wines of Les Torrents. You can see on this postcard Les Torrents being mentioned clearly on the top left of the postcards. This was the Grand Cru of the village of Romanèche. And that's actually why Romanèche became Romanèche Torrent, just like Chambolle or Puligny became Chambolle-Musigny and Puligny-Montrachet, because le Musigny, le Montrachet, and Les Torrents were the Grand Cru of the village. And actually, what I can tell you is that Les Torrents started to be famed under Louis XIV, Le Roi Soleil. So back in the 17th century, they were agreed to go into the la cour of Louis XIV. And we have much more history about Les Torrents in the 19th century when journalists, noticeably Mr. Reading, who was a British journalist, did the history and description of modern wines in 1816. And this Mr. Reading classified all the lieux-dits of France for the wine production, and Les Torrents was one of the first class of Mr. Reading, just like the best vineyard that we know today, Romanée Saint-Vivant, Musigny, Côte-Rôtie, etc., etc. You also showed an old picture of the Château du Moulin-à-Vent called Château des Torrents by the Past. So that's this postcard is actually dating back of the beginning of the 20th century. But what I can say is that 19th and 20th century, the Les Torrents and Moulin-a-Vent from 1936 are considered for French and for many people as I told you, a Grand Cru planted with vineyard noticeably completely in the 20th century. And then one of the part of the history is also the rise of the mass-produced wine from Beaujolais and Beaujolais Nouveau, let's say from the 1970s, which started to really make the reputation of the Cru and noticeably Moulin-a-Vent fall completely. And fortunately, I would say that for these last 10 or 15 years, the reputation of Cru has grown back again. And today we try to participate in this renewal of the Grand Cru of Beaujolais.
So I believe the property dates back to the early 18th century, doesn't it? So do your vineyards that you own today, and I think you're about 30, is it nearly 40 hectares, do those vineyards, are they the same vineyards that were planted, 100 years ago or more? Or did you buy vineyards? Did you sell any vineyards? How does the size of the property compare now with within the past, Edouard?
So yeah, the domain Château du Moulin-à-Vent did not so much move for the last 100 years. Actually, we have a very old map of the Château du Moulin-à-Vent from 1927, which takes a few examples, which is almost the same vineyard gathering that the one we have. The only addition we have done is actually in 2012, where we were lucky enough to acquire a few vineyards from La Rochelle that we will taste tonight on the 2020 vintage. But Château du Moulin-à-Vent, so 300 years of history, is also the very first bottle of Château du Moulin-à-Vent we have seen is 1921. And there is a persistence in the gathering of vineyard in Château du Moulin-à-Vent. So we can say that the domain has not so much changed for this last century. Yes.
And when you bought the property with your father, you invested quite a lot, didn't you? You replanted quite a bit of your vineyard. You increased the concentration of vines, didn't you?
Well, actually, what we mostly did, Tim, is actually we refreshed the facility for winemaking, which was very, very old school, let's say. Mm-hmm. So we just make it clean, with the floor and the ceiling. So the whole building is good for making good wines. Mm-hmm. After we kept pretty much the tanks which were here, and also in Moulin-a-Vent there is a tradition of barrel aging, and we think it's important to have at least a little barrel aging. So we also thought it was good to renew this barrel, this futaille when we arrived. And so you have the image now. So that's this is what we did for the building, and after for the vines, it's an everlasting job to take care of our vines. But what I can say is that prior to us, the vineyard were treated in a pretty old school way. The way that most of Beaujolais was unfortunately treated back in the 2000s. And progressively, we got to the organic way, with 2013 being the very first vintage with only organic products being used, and we should be certified in 2024. So
you're in transition at the moment.
Yeah, it's an 11 years transition, and I think that except the very first refreshment that we made in the beginning, most of the job is taking care of these old vines of Gamay, which are on average 60 years old today, and this is as I said, an everlasting job.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's worth talking just a little bit, Edouard, about how Moulin-a-Vent specifically compares with the other Cru Beaujolais. So, just to take, say, Fleury for an example, which is next door to Moulin-a-Vent, but the style of Fleury is completely different, isn't it, from Moulin-a-Vent? Moulin-a-Vent has more structure and is really the only Cru, perhaps with the exception of Morgon, that where wood is used quite widely. Perhaps just explain a little bit about the style that you're trying to achieve in your Moulin-a-Vent.
Yeah, I think it's really a matter of nature, Tim. It's really a very special place, Moulin-a-Vent, into the Beaujolais world. The first thing that I can say is that this windmill is not here by chance or by hazard, and we actually have a very specific local wind corridor, which actually comes from the north of Moulin-a-Vent and goes down till the windmill that you can see on the picture. These winds they have an impact on the berries. Right before harvest, so let's say end of August, when it's normally 25, 30 or 35 degrees in Moulin-a-Vent, when these winds blow, and it happens pretty regularly, they are able to dry, to accelerate also the maturity pretty fastly in the end of the ripening of the berries and help the berries to get more concentration and a very good ripeness in the end. That's the first Moulin-a-Vent specificity, I would say. And after, something which is more linked with the soil this time is that in Moulin-a-Vent, we have soils which are very, very sandy. So the granite that we have here is the result of more than 200 million years of erosion. So you can imagine that this is very, very eroded, so sandy. And the second thing that I want to mention, and which is very important, is that we have a lot of silica and iron oxide in Moulin-a-Vent. So soils which have more red color, I would say, that basically in Fleury. And these elements, iron oxide, silica, and winds, are responsible for making a very specific environment, pretty constraining, pretty stressing, and so encouraging the production of smaller berries, which once the wine is been made, produce wine with, as you said, Tim, more structure, more complexity, and also more ability to age in the time. This is one of the Moulin-a-Vent effects. So this is these three factors which makes Moulin-a-Vent completely different from the rest of the Cru Beaujolais. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder if we should start tasting. I'm sure people who have been waiting must be getting very thirsty. So we've got 4 wines tonight from you that we're going to talk about. 2 are identical wines, but from different vintages. Which are your so-called chateau. I think you just call them your chateau wine, don't you? And then we've got 2 single vineyard wines, which we're going to look at from the 2020 vintage. So I visited Edouard, when was it? I think it was October last year, and tasted Edouard's 2020s, which was the new release, because in Moulin-a-Vent, often you release the wines a year later than other Cru in Beaujolais, because the wines do take a little bit of time to come round. But I was blown away by the 2020 vintage, and I think I said to you at the time, Edouard, that's a nice little feature in a fine wine list. And sure enough, the wines have just gone into our March fine wine list. So the 3 wines from 2020, as Anna mentioned earlier, are available tonight. So let's move on to the first wine, which is the 2018. Maybe talk a little bit about the wine and the vintage, Edouard.
So first of all, let me just give you a few insights about our production. So as I said, 30 hectares, we produce about 120,000 bottles per year. So with an average yield of 30 hectoliters per hectare. You can see now on the screen a map of Moulin-a-Vent and then a zoom on the terroir where we are, the lieu-dit where we are located. It's important, first of all, to mention that the cuvée Château du Moulin-à-Vent that you have tonight with 2018 and 2020 vintage is so really our emblematic wine. And actually, when you look at the zoom you just show, that's perfect. The point number 1 in yellow is the windmill. The point number 2 is the chateau. So as you can see, we are very much central in the Moulin-a-Vent appellation. And actually, the Château du Moulin-à-Vent 2018 and 2020 is almost the same gathering of lieu-dit. Is the gathering of 3 lieux-dits, Le Moulin-a-Vent, La Roche, and Les Torrents. So the 3 lieux-dits which make the how to say, the turnaround around the windmill. So we have 1 vineyard, 1 lieu-dit facing north, 1 lieu-dit facing east, and 1 lieu-dit facing south. And so the gathering of these 3 lieux-dits, we think, and this is what we experience when we do the blend in Château du Moulin-a-Vent, participate in giving a very balanced feeling of the best granitic source of Moulin-a-Vent. it's very good that we have this map, so I can talk a little bit more about the diversity of lieux-dits in Moulin-a-Vent. First of all, you can see that there are a lot of different names. In total, in Moulin-a-Vent, the AOC is 600 hectares big, and we have 69 different lieux-dits. But what is also important to see is that you have a more terroir which are more red colored on the map. So it indicates that it's a very, very granitic and very, very sandy source of soil, and a more gray color of lieux-dits, where here the granite are melted with clay, with alluvion clay. So these are the two big styles of soil that we can find in Moulin-a-Vent, and after you have a lot of different variation. But when it comes to these three lieux-dits for the cuvée Château du Moulin-à-Vent, you can see that they are sourced in this red zone, which is, to my point of view, really much the best, the most noble source for gamay from Moulin-a-Vent. These three lieux-dits, Le Moulin-a-Vent, La Roche, and Les Torrents, were actually classified first class in 1874 by Mr. Boutker. So that gives you an idea on how classy are these lieux-dits for the cuvée Château du Moulin-a-Vent. After, regarding the vintage, 2018 and 2020 are pretty comparable, I would say. 2020, the very, very specificity of it is that we started harvesting on the 17th of August. So one of the earliest vintage ever of Moulin-a-Vent, to be able to keep this freshness, this acidity during a very hot and dry vintage. 2018 is a little bit later, starting on the 28th of August, but still a pretty solar, a pretty dry vintage. What I think is that 2018 nowadays start, to my point of view, of showing a very first sign of opening, I would say, more than evolution. And I think that that's also go in the direction that you were mentioning, Tim. The wines of Moulin-a-Vent, it's 100% gamay, so it has hopefully freshness, fruit, and it's very full of pleasure, but you can keep them for a long, long time. So both this 18 and 20, you can expect, and I'm 100% sure of what I say, you can keep them 15, 20 years in the cellar, they won't move. They will move, but they will be still very, very fine and fresh in 15 or 20 years.
I think my drink dates that I gave to the wines, Edouard, are fairly conservative, but I know that your wines do keep incredibly well. You've done tastings, vertical tastings, going back quite a few years, and the wines are noted for their longevity. So basically, the first two wines, you're tasting two fairly similar style vintages, but you can see the difference that 2 years makes in the evolution of the wine. I mean, the color is more vibrant probably in the 2020, but you're starting to get kind of secondary characters in the 2018. So it's a fascinating comparison.
Yeah, I think 18. What we remarked in the 2018 vintage is a very, very progressive and regular maturity. We had a very nice spring with a lot of water actually in 2018. So the reserve, the water reserve were good enough for the vineyard to resist to this very hot condition in the summer. And it was very, very flowering, it was very, very green, it was the vines were very, very beautiful in 2018. So very marked season of growing, spring sunny and humid, and summer sunny and dry. 2020, once more, it's a very special vintage because of this early harvest. So we need to be very focused on the analysis of the berries to be sure to not miss the right spot. And I think, 2020, it was important to harvest very early to keep the balance, the freshness, and the acidity.
Yes. I mean, one of the biggest challenges certainly from my perspective, as I see it, as a buyer coming to the region and tasting regularly, is climate change and how that affects the Gamay grape, because the Gamay grape, its strength is its perfume and its nuance and its delicacy, and obviously heat is not always conducive to producing that perfume and that delicacy. And if you handle your picking at the right time and your production methods, then you can moderate the effects of climate. Would you say that's fair, Edouard?
Yeah, I would say that. I would also, I think what's pretty positive for us in Beaujolais globally and with Gamay regarding the climate change is that you have to remember that the soil that we have here are naturally pretty sandy. And actually, the Gamay is very well adapted to not having so much water in its roots. So when you compare with Pinot Noir, which are cultivated on a more clay soil, the Pinot Noir, they are suffering much more of the drought than our Gamay. Just like the Syrah also in the Northern Rhone is not suffering so much, I say so much, of the drought. So I think, first of all, Gamay is adapted to dry condition. That's the first point. And also, and that's also a pretty positive message, we observed, because we have a few vineyards, Tim, you know that when you visited the Clos with us, we have some experimental vineyard. One of them is called Le Clos, where every 5 rows we have treated 5 rows with different technique. And actually, what we observed in 2018, this is when we did the final experimentation, is that the organic system was giving a more regular ripening than the conventional or the biodynamic one. So I also think that being organic in Moulin-a-Vent under this condition is also a nice way to make the ripening more progressive and regular.
So in terms of the evolution of the wine, my experience of tasting more mature Beaujolais is that the Gamay takes on almost a Pinot Noir-like delicacy in its older age. Would you say that? I mean, I remember inheriting a bottle of Beaujolais from my grandfather, who wasn't a drinker, but he had a few nice wines in his cellar. A bottle of 1949 Beaujolais Supérieur, it was called Beaujolais Supérieur. So it wasn't even a cru, and yet it was fresh as a daisy and tasted to me. If I hadn't known it was a Beaujolais, I would have said it was Pinot Noir.
I will say actually that maybe the old Moulin-a-Vent, I'm talking about wines that I've been tasting from the 60s or 70s or 90s. When I compare them, or when I think about my tasting of Pinots, noticeably, I think that they have a little bit more Gamays from Moulin-a-Vent. They have a little bit more fruit, I would say. So you know this fraise écrasée, so crushed strawberry jelly, I would say, is very, very present, I think, in the Moulin-a-Vent, just like the menthol, you know, the spice that I think you will find in the nose and the mouth of the 2020 goes much more into the menthol chlorophyll type of aromas when the wine takes 15, 20 years of time. And that helps. It's less the acidity of the wine, but more the evolution of the aromas, which keep the freshness of the wine. So I would say that they are comparable with Pinot Noir. I do agree with you, Tim. But to my point of view, they have even more sexiness, I would say, or even more roundness than...
There's more opulence, isn't there? Yeah, opulence, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think they're both beautiful wines. They've got very, very fine tannins. They've got a lovely, lovely structure. And as you mentioned earlier, they've maintained that freshness, which is so key to getting balanced wines. I think you partially use barrels for aging the Château wine, don't you? Is it 20%, approximately 20% barrel aging, and the rest is concrete?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so one thing, it's important to give ideas about how we do the wine, but what is even more important is that in a domain like ours, which is still small, human size, I would say, everything is made in function of the vineyard and the vintage. So basically, the level of barrel aging can pretty much vary from one vintage to another, just like the use of wall bunch. But on the 18 vintage, we use for Château du Moulin-à-Vent 30% of a barrel, and for the 2020s was just a little bit under, like 25% of oak barrel, the rest in stainless steel. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, shall we move on to the two lieux-dits, single vineyard wines? So the first of those is the Verillats.
Yeah. So we have this Vérillats 2020 and La Rochelle. I don't know if you can see La Rochelle 2020. So thank you very much for the coordination with the map. That's brilliant. Actually, Vérillats and Rochelle, for those who have big screens, these are, yeah, exactly, the two neighbors. And what I can tell you is that, you know, the roads, the little white line that goes through point 1 and 2, so through the hamlet of Letoran, this white line, exactly, thank you very much, the mouse, is actually a ridge. So this ridge, you have on the right of this ridge, you have a more east facing part of Moulin-a-Vent. On the left of this ridge, you have a more south-facing part of Moulin-a-Vent. So Vérillats is on the east side, on the east exposed side. And as you can see, Vérillats is very close to this orange bubble that you can guess, which is actually represented between the circles of Vérillats and Rochelle, this orange bubble. The vineyard that we have on the Vérillats is really much on this bubble. So this bubble indicates that we are almost at the top of a granite mount. So here on Les Vérillats, the soil is super thin, like 60 centimeters, and this is pure sands of granite. Punkt. So it's a very poor, it's a very porous, a very dry soil. You can't even imagine that plants can grow on this. And so the result is a very stressing environment where the gamay produces very, very small berries. And so most of the time, the wine shows this very wide, this very charmful style of Moulin-a-Vent, with still a lot of spicy graphite, all these notes which are very atypical from the sandy side of the AOC.
We're obviously tasting quite young wines tonight. When you drink these kind of wines relatively young, would you recommend decanting them to aerate them?
Yeah, definitely, Tim. So actually what I personally do with the 2020s currently, we are starting to open some 2021, which we start to release. But 2020, I do all the time a double decanting before serving them. So that's how I manage them at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think
in 2018, I would what I do with wines which starts to have this evolution or opening is just opening them, taking a glass, like 10 centiliters, just to taste and to aerate the bottle, and open it, I would say 1 hour before lunch or dinner.
Yeah, and in terms of temperature, I mean, my little sachets were in the fridge I took them out about an hour before our webinar began, and they're starting to reach the perfect temperature, which I think is cellar temperature is absolutely perfect for the wines of Beaujolais. They shouldn't be too warm. I have a bit of a thing about drinking red wines too warm. I would much rather they were a little bit too cold and they can warm up while you're drinking them. But obviously, young Beaujolais, Beaujolais Village, for example, you can drink a little bit colder because the tannins are less present. But I think cellar temperature for Moulin-a-Vent is more or less spot on.
Yeah, I would go. I would say 17 or 18 degrees Celsius. So in Fahrenheit, I don't really know what it makes. And actually, on vintage where there is a little bit less of acidity, I'm thinking about like 19 vintage. And when it comes from crus, which have a little bit less structure, half a degree less or a degree less can be pretty enjoyable. But for the Moulin-a-Vent, yes, the Pinot Noir temperature is the good one for wine, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's delicious, the Verillats, absolutely fantastic. And I was looking back at my tasting notes from when I tasted it with you, and I was eulogizing about it in my tasting notes. So let's move on to the fourth wine, which is the La Rochelle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
now, these come from the wine comes from some pretty old vines, doesn't it, Edouard?
Yes, absolutely, Tim. So once more, the vines in Château du Moulin-à-Vent is on average 60 years old, but La Rochelle gathers vines which are between 80 and 100 years old. So as you saw on the map, it's a neighbor from Vérillats. Both lieux-dits were actually classified first class by Mr. Boutker. So this is very the top of the top of the lieux-dits of Moulin-a-Vent. So Tim, you did a very nice selection. Bravo. And yes, the difference between Verillats and Rochelle, of course, the style of the soil is the same, granite and sand. So very, very eroded granites from Moulin-a-Vent. But what happens in La Rochelle is a little plus, I would say. La Rochelle is on the other side of the ridge, so exposed east. And actually, another thing which is actually very important about Moulin-a-Vent and which explains why Moulin-a-Vent has this specificity as a cru Beaujolais is also that Moulin-a-Vent is actually has not a lot of slope. You know, the average slope in Moulin-a-Vent is 6%, while in crus like Chirouble or Régnier, it can be on average 12 or even 15. So there is not so much slope, and actually, as I said, the granite have been eroded for more than 200 million years. And with this erosion, naturally, the granite will release clay, very, very fine clay. We call that colluvion clay. And thanks to this gentle slope, the colluvion clay will be able to stabilize in Moulin-a-Vent, while in other crus where the slope are bigger, they will be washed out. And so in La Rochelle, this is what we have, granite sands and this presence of clay in depth, which will give I would say, the perfect balance for a Moulin-a-Vent wine. So to my point of view, Verillats is a very atypical terroir, producing, as I said, this very wide and charmful wine. La Rochelle is just more ground, so maybe less atypical, but it has, to my point of view, everything to age even better than les Verillats.
It's a baby, this wine, but I mean, you can see the potential is fabulous. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what vintage are you drinking? You know, if you open a bottle in the evening, Edouard, what are the vintages that you are drinking at the moment that give you enjoyment?
Well, actually, the Château 2020, I think, is if you aerate it a little bit, I think it's very, very much enjoyable. I just had one bottle for the lunch. After, when it comes to a little more mature vintage, the one that we really liked and that I showed noticeably to the World Best Summer Award a month ago was the 2016 vintage, which has a lot of perfume and has a lot of actually Syrah style with this blood orange, white pepper aromas. And after me, I really like also the 2013 at the moment, which is a little bit austere, which is a little bit acid driven, but which to me has a lot of class, and which is also very, very young, but already open, and you can feel that there is a great vibrancy also in this very late vintage, 2013. So yeah, I would say 13 and 16 for a little back vintage. This is what I like. And after, I do open, not often, but sometimes some 93 at the moment. So 30 years, they are just perfect.
Fantastic. 30-year-old Beaujolais. Excellent.
Oh, yeah.
So, well, that's the wines. Anna, should we do a few questions and answers?
Yes, absolutely. I think that would be lovely. Thank you, Edouard and Tim, so much. I'm not tasting the wines tonight, and I'm very, very jealous. They sound absolutely fantastic, and members have happily disagreed on their favourites in the chat. So I think there's been votes for everything so far, which is wonderful. If we could start, Edouard, I would love to ask a question from Mark, who has asked for you to possibly talk a little more about how the vines are trained. I don't think everybody knows that Gobelets is a common style in Beaujolais.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the many subjects that we did not had this evening. So yeah, Beaujolais is also beautiful because of this goblet pruning. So let me quickly tell you why we have this viticulture. The gamay is naturally very productive. So if you want the gamay to produce less but better, you have to plant it in high density, which you can see on the picture here. And so high density means also low cutting for the light to penetrate in the row of vine. And the gamay, the traditional pruning for gamay is goblet, so which means that we will cut the goblet so that we have 3 or 4 branches, which goes as how to say goblet in English, as a cup, I would say. So what we do more than this is that we keep the goblet pruning, but we keep it so it's in a line. We call that goblet en éventail, so as a fan. Yeah. And the advantage of this pruning is that for us who are organic and who work the soil integrally, we trellis all the vines. So the trellis is very important for 2 reasons. First of all, to make the passing of the tractor much more easily. If you don't have the trellis, then the vines are more open and it's more complicated to go into the row. And second thing, the gamay produced naturally is pretty productive, but does not make a lot of leaf. So it's important also to have the trellisation so you can maximize the exposition of leaves to the sun and so maximize photosynthesis. So that's how we treat the vines: high density, pruning en éventail, goblet en éventail, sorry, and all trellised for the goblet. And the oldest, also something that I can add, the oldest vineyard, just like La Rochelle, is also worked by horse to avoid ripping off the oldest vines we have.
That was fascinating. Thank you very much. I've actually, for my sins, I've never seen the fan goblet before. So thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful.
You're welcome to visit it, Anna, and all the people on this Zoom. You're very welcome in Moulin-a-Vent to see that.
Well, that was actually another question, Edouard, from Karen from Hampshire. She said, "Our visitors welcome." So you've answered her question. Good, good. Now, we've had two questions from two members asking about other grape varieties that might be grown on the estate. And I don't think we really covered Gamay, that the Gamay is produced. Have you ever tried any other varieties?
Yes, but I can't tell you, Anna.
It's illegal.
I could go after this wine society Zoom, and no, the reality is that there is for the red wines, there is definitely one variety which could be very suitable for Moulin-a-Vent is the Syrah. Maybe you can, if you still have the PowerPoint under you, you can show the map. A pretty old geological map.
I know the one you mean.
Yeah, where you actually can see that the source of soil for Beaujolais, yeah, that's the one. The source of soil for Beaujolais is pretty much the same than the one for the Northern Rhone. So these are the gneisses crystallophiliens, the rose color that you can see on this map. And you can actually see that the basis of Côte-Rôtie and Cornas is made of this rose color, just like Moulin-a-Vent. And when you go up north in Burgundy, this is completely not the same source of soil. So Syrah is definitely an option which can be observed here and there. And after for the whites, one of our experimental vineyards is planted with many different varieties actually. And so we have Brice, our winemaker or technical director that you can see also in one of these pictures. He has made some tests with Melon Bourgogne, with aligoté, because our soils are very acid naturally. So this is one of the features that needs to be adapted with the variety we select. And Melon Bourgogne, aligoté, what did we? And also Roussanne could be also interesting varieties for sometime the future or just for the curiosity, I would say.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, another member asked about white Beaujolais and whether you had ever made a white wine or would you make a white wine. So I think you've answered that question.
Actually, so in Moulin-a-Vent, all the cru, to answer these people, all the cru are dedicated to the red production at the moment. The white Beaujolais are mostly made in the southern part of Beaujolais, so on the AOC Beaujolais and Beaujolais Village, where on some zone you can find more clay and which are more easy to produce noticeably Chardonnay here.
Wonderful, thank you. Now I have a question for Tim, really. Well, it's for both of you, but I'd like to get Tim's opinion as well. It's quite a meaty question from Peter Cousins, who said, for me, Moulin-a-Vent and Morgon are best kept young, but Fleury needs to be drunk young. Is classifying both as a Beaujolais Cru confusing for the consumer, and does it affect the market?
Wow.
Big question.
So I think it's all about how you describe the wines, and if you're able to get the message across that Moulin-a-Vent and Morgon are the wines that need time and the wines that keep longest, and need time to hit their straps. I think it's all about communicating, and I hope that we get that message across. But it's true that the styles of the different cru are quite marked, and obviously that's a function of various things, the terroir, the soils particularly. Yes, absolutely right. So Fleury is really best enjoyed on the fruit, youngish. And Morgon and Moulin-a-Vent definitely need time, and then the other cru very much somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, What I think about also Beaujolais globally is that actually there are fantastic terroirs everywhere in Beaujolais. Of course, I'm an evangelizer for Moulin-a-Vent, and I truly believe that Moulin-a-Vent has a specificity. But very recently, Tim, you know him very well. I was tasting at Jean-Marc Burgot estate in Morgon, and at the end of the tasting, he brought us a 1961 Beaujolais village made by his father. And that was, to me, one of the, I would almost say, one of the best old mature wines that I have had. So even on, I would say, less reputed AOCs like Beaujolais and Beaujolais Village, for the best, when the winemaker is here and the vintage is here, you can have truly unbelievable mature wines. So Moulin-a-Vent has an advantage, but all Beaujolais has a lot of interest.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've got another question from Dr. Paul Trafford, who has asked, there are a lot of other areas on your map, which I can get up in a moment. He's asked, what other wines do you produce? You mentioned that Tim had made a good selection. So if you have a moment, we could, you might be able to mention a couple of the other Lieux D, and if there's any sort of differences that you see to certain Lieux D in the region.
Yeah, so of course there is the Chantecourt, which is just under point number 1 on the very beginning of the gray zone. That's a beautiful Lieux D also, where we have a little bit more alluvion clay. It's a terroir which produces wines with more, how to say, more elegance, it's very straight. It has a little bit more acidity felt on the tongue. You know, it has a lot of energy. It's also very, very particular. I think Chantecourt as a Lieux D. We have Les Caves close to this rose bubble on the left of the map. Which is also very, very particular for its concentration of silica. This rose bubble is actually a rock going out of earth, and which is silica, very silica rich. So silica, for those who don't represent themselves, it's just like glass, I would say. So these are very, very tiny crystals, white crystals. And I will tell you something, it's so rich in silica that we have a cactus growing on this rock. The cactus, they are called, it's not a joke, huh? I'm not selling you a dream, but these cactus, which are named Figuier de Barbarie, they are growing on the lower part of the rock. So that's very, very special place, also very solar and very dry place also for growing vines. And after, yes, Le Moulin-a-Vent, so which is between the chateau and the windmill. I will finish with this one. It's also very special because it's in the same time very superficial and north exposed, and also in the hamlet of Les Torrents, so completely protected from the winds. So that creates an environment which is much fresher, with more humidity also. So the growing of the berries here is much longer and slower. So that's also another Lieux D which is very, very atypical. And actually, I can just finish my point on this. So I told you we have 69 Lieux D in Moulin-a-Vent. Actually, this is also the Moulin-a-Vent is the AOC with the largest amount of Lieux D. And when we do the tasting with the vintners of Moulin-a-Vent, nowadays there are around 20 of these Lieux Ds which are, separated by different vintners. And I think that corresponds to the real diversity that we can find in Moulin-a-Vent, about 20 different soil. So we still have more, we still have a little time to grow our offer of Lieux D from Moulin-a-Vent. So that's a message for Tim.
Well, there's lots of fans on this call, which is wonderful. And I have a little technical question from Richard, who has asked, I noticed that these wines are 13%. Do you try to avoid getting too much alcohol?
Of course, the alcohol is a part of the balance when we do our analysis before harvest. We are looking at the acidity, the phenolic, the maturity global, and of course the tasting of the berries. So it's, as a matter of logic, berries. It's pretty rare that acidity is at the right level when the alcohol is at 17 degrees equivalent. So we are not looking for anything regarding alcohol. It can be 12, it can be 14.5. We are pretty free about this. What I can say is that starting harvesting the 2020 from the 17th of August till the 2nd of September, we had an equivalent alcohol of, depending on each vineyard, 12.6 till 14.6 on this vintage. And after, as we blend, even Le Verillats or La Rochelle, it's a blend of 3 to 5 different vineyards of the lieu-dit of Verillats and Rochelle. And so also the blend that enable us to smooth the more extreme vineyard that we could have on one same lieu-dit. So we don't look for anything. Sometimes it's 13.5, sometimes it's less than 13. But so far it has never been 12.5 on the labels.
Thank you very much. And I think we've got time for one final question. I've had 2 members ask, so I must ask you before we finish up. They're interested to hear about whether carbonic maceration is still popular in the region, and your thoughts on it.
It's still popular. On, I think, on AOCs where the gamay has a little bit more generosity. I think carbonic maceration is more adapted to gameys with a little bit more volumic gameys, berries of gameys. I also think that it's less and less used for vintners who are looking for valorizing their lieu-dit, basically. Carbonic maceration has been very much used for showing the primary aromas of gamay, this fruitiness, this really enjoyable side of the gamay, which is definitely an asset for everyone who uses gamay. But we think in Château du Moulin-à-Vent and in Moulin-a-Vent globally, just like in Fleury and Morgon, that carbonic can also hide the variation from one lieu-dit to another. And so, as for us, it has not a lot of sense to use carbonic when we want to show the difference between Verillats, Rochelle, Chantecourt, Le Moulin-à-Vent, or Les Caves. So we don't use it.
Thank you. Tim, have you got any thoughts to add to that?
No, I mean, I think serious domains who are producing wines, as Edouard said, that want to reflect as much as possible the terroir, tend to eschew carbonic maceration. But it is a very useful technique for more, should we say, more commercial wines. It helps to make them more approachable, and quite a few of the wines that we do that are less expensive, they're not fully carbonic maceration, but they might be semi-carbonic maceration. And if it's handled properly, it can still be a very nice way of producing a commercial style of Beaujolais and maintaining an element of the provenance and the terroir.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, thank you. I think on that note, that's a perfect moment to end on. And for me to say thank you so much to both of you for what has been a very insightful evening. I must admit, Edouard, there was a moment where I had to grab a pen and furiously scribble down some notes for sending to my fellow MW students, because your fascination with soils and your reactions, your experimental vineyard is all so interesting to hear. So I thank you very much. And thank you, Tim, as always, for being such a wonderful host tonight. It's always
so well, yes, thank you, members. Thank you, Edouard, very much for joining us. And I should say this is my last webinar with Anna, because Anna leaves at the end of the month, sadly. I'm very sorry, and I'm sure we all are, to see you go, but you've moved to France, or you're in the process of moving to France and starting a new chapter. And thanks very much for all your hard work with the online webinars. They've been brilliant.
Thank you, Tim. And Edouard, you'll be getting a knock on the door from me at some point, I'm sure.
Did you say?
You'll be getting a knock on the door from me at some point, I am sure.
You're very welcome. I was actually about to ask if you're settling in Beaujolais, Anna, but we will have a discussion later. No, thank you to you, Tim, to Anna, all the members. As I said in the introduction, it's a pleasure for me to talk about Moulin-a-Vent and Château du Moulin-à-Vent and bring this message about aging them and enjoying them at different ages. So thank you, the Wine Society, for being such a privileged partner for us in the UK. And see you soon in Moulin-a-Vent. Do not hesitate to come visit us. We are happy to show our beautiful environment.
Fantastic.
Thank you both.
Thank you. I'll drink to that. Bonsoir tout le monde.
Bonsoir.
Merci Edouard.
Merci.